That Thursday afternoon, as golden light spilled across the glass-paneled offices of the Chicago law firm where I worked, I was wrapping up a strategy session with a corporate client. My tone was professional, my posture composed. On the outside, I looked like a woman in control. But the truth, I was exhausted. It had been a brutal week of back-to-back meetings, and I was counting the seconds until I could breathe. And then, my phone rang. I frowned. It was an unfamiliar number, but something about it felt sharp, urgent. I hesitated, then answered. "Hello, this is Brad Coleman from Horizon First Bank." A calm male voice said on the other end. "I'm calling to verify some details regarding a mortgage application for the property at 720 Glenwood Drive." I blinked. Glenwood Drive? The name meant nothing to me. "I think you have the wrong person," I replied politely, already half expecting a spam call. "I don't have any property at that address, and I certainly haven't applied for a mortgage." There was a pause. Then Brad's tone changed, lower now, uncertain. "I understand your confusion, Ms. Hayes, but your name, Lauren Hayes, is listed as the co-signer. The primary applicant is Chloe Hayes, your sister?" I stopped breathing. I felt my spine stiffen, my hands go cold. "Chloe?" The pen I'd been holding slipped from my fingers and clattered onto the polished desk. I stared blankly at the screen. "That's impossible," I whispered. "I've never signed anything for my sister. I would never." "I understand, ma'am," he said, "but this loan was approved 7 months ago. All documentation shows your signature. Your parents, Mr. and Mrs. Hayes, submitted the forms at our main branch." The world tilted. Suddenly, I was no longer in my office. I was back at Dad's birthday dinner. The moment they slid those health insurance papers across the table, saying they just needed a signature for renewal. The way Mom, Maggie, avoided eye contact. Talking too fast, too cheerfully. The silence that followed every time I mentioned Chloe's shiny new house. A dull ringing built in my ears. My breath came in short, ragged gasps. "I need copies of everything," I said. "Now. I'll email the full file within the next few minutes." Brad replied, "But there's something else. The loan is over 2 months delinquent. The outstanding balance is currently $17,800. $17,800. I didn't even hear the rest of what he said. His voice faded into static as the ground beneath me cracked. I hung up the call and stared at my reflection in the dark screen of my phone. My mouth was open, but I had no words. Just a deep, ugly hollowness. Within seconds, I was dialing the one person I trusted more than anyone else, Ethan Brooks. My best friend since law school. A civil attorney, calm, fiercely loyal, the kind of person who didn't flinch at chaos. He picked up on the second ring. "They forged my signature," I choked out. "Chloe, my parents, all of them." He didn't ask a single question, just said, "I'll be there in 15 minutes. And he was. By the time Ethan arrived, Brad's email had landed in my inbox. We opened the PDF together, shoulder to shoulder, and watched as the lie I never saw coming stared us in the face. It was there, the mortgage document, a declaration signed in my name, my handwriting, or what looked like mine. But I saw it instantly. The loop at the end of the L in Lauren? It wasn't mine, it was hers, Maggie's, my mother's handwriting, stolen and twisted into betrayal. They didn't even try to disguise it. Ethan muttered, eyes narrowing, "They counted on you never looking." I couldn't speak, my throat was on fire. My fingers trembling, my phone lit up again. "Mom" appeared on the screen like a curse I didn't want to utter. Ethan gave me a steady look. "Answer it, stay calm." I swallowed the lump in my throat and hit accept. "Hi, Mom." Her voice was sweet, too sweet. "Hi, sweetheart, are you free tonight? Your dad's making your favorite, spaghetti and meatballs." I almost laughed at the absurdity, laughed at the cruelty of pretending nothing was wrong. "Perfect," I said flatly, "because I got an interesting call from Horizon First Bank." Silence, and then her voice, breaking just slightly. I was going to tell you." "Really? When, Maggie? After they foreclosed on the house in my name?" "Lauren, Chloe needed help, and you're doing so well. You'd understand." "Understand? They used my name, my future, my license as a lawyer. They used my life as collateral. I need you to understand something," I said, every word cutting like glass. "This isn't about Chloe needing help. This is about all of you deciding I'd never notice." Her voice trembled. "Families help each other." I felt the tears rising, but I blinked them back, my voice turning cold. "No, Maggie, families protect each other. You didn't just break my trust. You burned it. I ended the call, and in that moment, something inside me shifted. Not grief, not fear, resolve. They used my success like a shield to hide their mess. Now they were going to find out what it really meant to cross a woman who knows the law and is done staying quiet. If this story stopped you in your tracks, even just for a second, tell me in the comments. Have you ever been betrayed by the ones you trusted most? Share your story, and if you believe in truth, justice, and women standing up for themselves, don't forget to subscribe. There's more to come. Ethan had barely stepped into my apartment before I shoved the screen in front of him. My fingers were trembling, and I couldn't steady them. Tell me I'm wrong, I said, voice low, broken. Tell me this isn't real. He sat beside me without a word, studying the PDF Brad from the bank had just sent. There it was, my name, Lauren Hayes, typed in bold, a forged signature beneath it that looked eerily familiar. That perfect little loop on the L at the end. I'd seen that flourish before. On birthday cards, on post-it notes left on my lunchbox in high school. It was my mother's handwriting. Maggie hadn't just lied to me. She traced my life, my identity, and signed it away like it was hers to rewrite. Ethan tapped the screen. They didn't even try to cover their tracks. They didn't expect you to look this closely. He paused, eyes narrowing. This is a felony, Lauren. Multiple counts, identity theft, forgery, wire fraud, and if the amount exceeds $250,000, which I suspect it does, we're talking serious prison time. I couldn't speak, because something deeper than rage was settling in. A cold, hollow ache that stretched from my chest to my fingertips. They didn't make a mistake. They made a decision. Together. I need to know everything. I said, every account, every lie, everything they did using my name. Ethan nodded and opened his laptop, fingers already flying across the keys. Let's dig. The first search result made my stomach churn. There are 3 credit cards under your name, he said, all opened within the past 6 months. Combined credit limit, $70,000. And yeah, they're all maxed out. My mouth went dry. I never applied for those. I only have one card, my Amex from 2019. There's more. Of course there was. He clicked to the next file. Unsecured personal loan, $50,000. Disbursed 4 months ago. Your name, your social security number. And, one more thing. I didn't even flinch anymore. Go ahead. Your investment account. It was used as collateral for a business loan. I blinked. I don't own a business. You don't need to, Ethan replied grimly. They just needed paperwork, a signature, something they've gotten really good at forging. I felt like I was sinking through concrete. 7 months. For 7 months, they'd been living inside the shell of my identity. While I worked 12-hour days, chasing deadlines, defending clients, they were playing puppet master with my name. Ethan opened a browser window and pulled up my credit score history. 6 months ago, your FICO was 812. He turned to look at me. It's now 613. I stared at the screen like it had slapped me. That number wasn't just a score. It was my security, my trust, my freedom. You need to act fast, Ethan said, trying to steady me. We're past the point of damage control. If your firm finds out, if there's an audit or even a whisper of investigation, they could think you were involved. You could lose your license. Lauren, I pressed my palms into my eyes, forcing back tears. They said they loved me. I whispered, and they stole everything. Ethan placed a hand on my shoulder. Then we start now. He began listing steps like a battle plan. Freeze all credit reports. File identity theft reports with every financial institution. Pull IP logs from all account access. Secure devices. Contact fraud experts. I nodded, not even sure if I was breathing. Then I remembered something. A chill danced down my spine. Last month, Mom borrowed my laptop, said she needed to check her email. She was here, alone, for almost an hour. Ethan turned sharply. And Chloe, has she had access to your office? Yeah, on my birthday. She came by with cupcakes. Stayed late while I finished calls. He opened my remote login history. Clipped through. Paused. There it is, he said, turning the screen toward me. Unauthorized login, from your mom's IP. The same night Chloe was at your office. I stared. I couldn't speak. They planned it, I said finally, my voice barely audible. It wasn't an accident. They orchestrated it. Ethan looked at me, eyes steady. What do you want to do next? I turned to him. Something inside me had shattered, but something else was solidifying. There's no turning back, I whispered. Tomorrow night, I confront them, but I'm not going as their daughter. He nodded slowly. You're going as the woman they underestimated. Have you ever uncovered a lie so big it cracked your world in half? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. Because stories like this, they don't just happen to me. They happen to people like us. Who trust too much, who love too hard, who stay silent too long. The night air felt heavy, like it knew what I was about to do. I stood outside the home I once believed was a sanctuary, the same house where my childhood laughter echoed off the walls, where birthdays were celebrated with candles and promises. But tonight, I wasn't coming for cake. I was coming for the truth. The door creaked open. The smell hit me first, familiar. Roast chicken, the kind Maggie always made when she wanted to soften bad news. My throat tightened. There they were. Chloe sat at the dining room table, her face pale and blotchy, like she'd been crying for hours. Richard stood by the stove, stoic, arms folded like a man preparing for war. And Maggie smiled like nothing was broken, like this wasn't a funeral for trust. Lauren, she said softly, like she hadn't gutted me with a forged signature. You're here. I am, I replied coldly, placing a thick folder on the table with a thud. Let's stop pretending. Chloe flinched. Maggie looked away. These are the documents, I continued, my voice cutting like frost. Every credit card, every loan, every fraudulent account, all in my name, all carrying the weight of your lies. I didn't mean for it to get this bad. Chloe stammered, her voice cracking like porcelain. It started with a down payment. Just a little help, and then you buried me alive in debt. I snapped, and you let me live for months thinking my life was still intact. I was going to fix it. She whispered. How? I shot back. You spent $9,000 last month at a spa. Another $3,000 on designer bags. How were you planning to repay any of this? Silence. Chloe's eyes welled with tears. I don't know, because you don't have a job. Do you? I said, my tone flat but venomous. She shook her head, her voice barely audible. Not really, just some freelance stuff. I looked at her, my little sister. The same girl I defended in middle school when she was bullied for being shy. The same girl who used to fall asleep on my shoulder during long car rides. And yet here she was, willing to steal my name, my reputation, my future, and still expect my forgiveness. Richard finally spoke, his voice low, like gravel under pressure. She just needed a chance. Lauren, a little push. You're successful, you have everything. Chloe just needed a start. My blood turned cold. So you handed her my identity, my career, my financial safety. He looked at me, unflinching. We did what we thought was best for the family. Family, that word felt like poison in my mouth. Best for the family, I repeated, bitterly, at the expense of the only person holding this family up. Maggie stepped forward, her eyes glistening with tears. I believed you'd understand, that you'd forgive. You've always been so strong. Lauren, we thought you'd be okay. I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that didn't belong in this house. You thought I'd be okay, I said, voice rising. You gambled my name like it was poker chips. And now that the house of cards is crumbling, you want me to be understanding? Please, Chloe whispered, standing. Don't do this. If you go to the authorities, I'll lose everything. You already lost my trust. I replied, and you're not entitled to my silence on top of that. But I'm your sister, she cried. We're blood. I stepped closer, my heart cracking under the weight of betrayal. You're my sister, I said quietly, and you wrecked the career I spent a decade building. You turned me into a pawn. You let me stand in the firing line while you spent my future like pocket change. Chloe broke down in sobs. Maggie covered her face with her hands. Richard stood still, the shame finally catching up to his pride. I looked at each of them, at the family that once told me love meant sacrifice. Apparently, the sacrifice had always been me. I've spoken to Ethan, I continued, and I've already started the process. Tomorrow morning, I'm filing a complaint with the Financial Crimes Unit. This isn't just about me anymore. This is about accountability. You'd really take your own family to court? Richard asked, his voice shaking for the first time. I'm not taking anyone anywhere, I said. You walked there yourselves. Maggie stepped forward, desperation etched into every line of her face. We can fix this. We can find a way. No, I interrupted. You can't fix this, because this wasn't a mistake. It was a choice, and you made it together. The room fell into silence. A suffocating, final silence, the kind that follows an explosion. I turned to leave, but then stopped. This isn't anger, I said. This is justice, because if I stay quiet now, there will be a next time, and another, until there's nothing left of me to protect. I walked out. Left behind were the tears, the justifications, the hollow excuses dressed up as love. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like their daughter. I felt like someone who survived them. I thought the worst was behind me when I walked out of my parents' house that night. I thought the debt, the forged documents, and the ruined credit score were the extent of what they had taken. I was wrong, because the next morning, Ethan walked into my office with coffee, a laptop, and a look in his eyes I hadn't seen before. Not in law school, not in a courtroom, not even when we found out they'd opened $70,000 in credit under my name. It was the look of someone who'd seen a map to hell. "You need to eat something before you see this," he said. I didn't. I couldn't. Vivian Clark, our firm's senior financial analyst, arrived shortly after. She was calm, surgical, the kind of woman who didn't flinch, but even she looked disturbed. We opened the files, and that's when I realized they hadn't just stolen my name. They had become me. Vivian pulled up the first account. "Riverpine Growth Fund," she said, tapping her keyboard. "Do you recognize it?" I shook my head. "Never heard of it. It's not real," she said quietly. "It's a fabricated private investment entity. But several people, including members of the Windmere Golf Club, were persuaded to invest because they believed you were managing it." "What?" I whispered. She didn't answer. She just turned the screen. There it was. My face, my law firm bio, my job title, my investment portfolio. Replicated, stolen, used as bait. "They used your credibility," Vivian said. "Your voice, your reputation, to lure in investors, including elderly clients and family friends. A fake Gmail account, e-signatures copied from contracts I'd signed over the years. A letter welcoming contributors to Riverpine. Signed, Lauren Hayes. Esque." I felt sick. "It's sophisticated," Vivian added. "Whoever set this up knew financial structures well." The money flowed through 4 intermediary accounts, 2 domestic, 1 in buys, and 1 anonymous account in Luxembourg. She clicked through screenshots of transactions. One name kept showing up. "Richard Hayes," I said aloud. "My father." Vivian nodded. "He's listed as the initial account manager." The room tilted. "But that's not even the worst part," Ethan said quietly. I turned toward him. He clicked again, and my heart stopped. "Look at the names," he said. "On the investor list, Eleanor Whitmore, my high school literature teacher. The woman who stayed late every Wednesday to coach me through Shakespeare. She was my mother's best friend. She lost everything," Vivian said gently. "Her entire retirement fund." I sat back in my chair, numb, my jaw clenched so tightly I could feel the pain in my teeth. "They used my face," I whispered. "They used me to steal from the people who trusted us the most." I felt like I was watching a horror film I was somehow the star of, but had never auditioned for. Each scene more grotesque than the last. Each name another gut punch. They didn't just drag my name through the mud. They dressed it up in pearls and used it to rob people blind. "All in my image. All of the victims believed you were behind the fund," Vivian continued. "They believed your name meant safety. That's why they didn't hesitate to hand over their life savings. And now I'm attached to all of it," I murmured. Ethan nodded slowly. "Not legally, not yet, but your identity has been weaponized. If we don't move fast, they'll keep going." Vivian looked at me, eyes sharp. "We need to notify the FBI. This is no longer just a family betrayal. This is federal wire fraud, cross-border laundering, identity-based financial crime, and you need to tell the victims the truth." Ethan added. My throat tightened. "They'll hate me." "No," Vivian said firmly. "They've been lied to. What they need is you. The real you, the one who didn't stay silent." Later that day, we arranged to meet with the victims. The first to arrive was Eleanor Whitmore. Her gray coat was pristine, her makeup immaculate, but her hands trembled as she walked into the room. "Lauren," she said, her voice softer than I remembered. "Your mother told me you were building something brilliant, something exclusive. I trusted her. I trusted you." Tears burned the corners of my eyes. "I had no idea, Eleanor. If I had." She shook her head. "They used your face, your kindness, your ambition. I emptied my retirement account. I lost everything, because I believed you stood for something real." "I do," I whispered, "and I swear to you, I will not stop until we get justice." By the time the meeting ended, 14 victims had come forward. Old friends, former clients, neighbors, a nurse who once took care of my grandmother. All of them betrayed by people who smiled at them across dinner tables and called it trust. Vivian pieced together the paper trail. Ethan contacted the FBI. I began collecting statements, documents, screenshots. Each night, I worked until my eyes blurred. Not out of duty, out of guilt, out of fury, out of fire. Because I wasn't just trying to clear my name. I was trying to give those people their dignity back. If you've ever been made into a mask someone else wore while they stole from others. If you've ever watched your face, your name, your entire life be twisted into a weapon, you're not alone. Tell me in the comments if this resonates. If you've been there, if you were there, I want to hear your story. And if you believe the truth always deserves a voice, don't forget to subscribe, because this is far from over. Next, we bring them in, one by one, and this time, they don't get to hide behind family. I never thought I'd walk into a bank holding a file thick enough to ruin my own family. But that morning, as I stepped into the marble lobby of Hallage Bank alongside Ethan and Vivian, that's exactly what I was carrying. Not vengeance, not grief, evidence. In my hands were printed emails, fraudulent, doctored, and traced, screenshots of account access logs, confirmed IP matches, identity records, bank statements, investment pitches sent from the fake email address created in my name. A blueprint of betrayal laid out in font and signature. And beneath it all, my name. My real name, twisted, forged, used as a mask for a scheme that defrauded over a dozen innocent people. Frank Delaney, the branch manager, greeted us with a stiff smile. It was the kind of smile people wear when they already know something is wrong. "Lauren," he said carefully, glancing at the file in my hand. "I just met with your parents earlier this morning." I said nothing, just placed the folder in front of him like a verdict. He opened it slowly. His face shifted as he read page after page, his eyebrows narrowing, his jaw tightening. By the time he reached the IP access logs, all pretense of neutrality was gone. "Oh my God," he whispered. "These applications, the investments, every access point traces back to the same origin, your parents' home." Vivian nodded, "And the laptop used belongs to Madison Hayes. Same machine that accessed Lauren's law firm portal on her birthday." Frank looked up at me, stunned. "We'll need to escalate this to our legal division immediately. The accounts must be frozen until further review." Ethan stepped forward, voice steady. "We've already sent a duplicate report to the Northridge County Police Department and the Federal Financial Crimes Office. Agents will be arriving shortly." Less than 40 minutes later, 2 plainclothes officers entered the bank. They didn't smile. They didn't hesitate. They knew what this was. "Miss Hayes," one of them, Inspector Hope, said, "we've reviewed the documentation. It's time to bring in the parties involved." Frank called my parents and Chloe under the guise of needing a clarification on the mortgage forms. They agreed to come in immediately. They must have thought they were still ahead, still in control, still capable of talking their way out of this. They had no idea the walls had already closed in. When they arrived, Maggie wore a pale blue blouse, the kind she used to save for church. Her hair curled just so, trying to look respectable. Chloe looked fragile, almost childlike, mascara clinging to the corners of her lashes like she'd run out of strength. And Richard was unreadable, his eyes cold, like he still didn't believe any of this would touch him. "Frank," Maggie said cheerfully, "we're so glad you called. We thought it was best to clear things up with Lauren." Clear things up, like this was a family misunderstanding. Like they hadn't built a criminal enterprise off the bones of my name. "Exactly," I said, pushing the folder toward them. "Let's clear everything up." They opened the file, pages rustled, their smiles fell. Maggie's hands trembled, Chloe's lip quivered, Richard's face darkened, his fingers curling into a fist. "What do you think you're doing?" he hissed. "I'm stopping the 3 of you from continuing to ruin lives," I said, looking each of them in the eye. "You called it helping family. I call it what it is, organized crime." Maggie slammed her palm on the table. "You're going to destroy us over a few mistakes." "A few?" I said, voice rising. 14 victims, over 5 million stolen, a fund that never existed. And my face, my credentials, used to make it all look real. "But Madison is your sister." Maggie cried. "No," I replied, cold as glass. "She's a criminal, and so are you." That's when the officers stepped forward. "Gordon Hayes, Margaret Hayes, Madison Hayes," said Inspector Hope, flashing his badge. "You are being placed under arrest for charges including financial fraud, identity theft, wire fraud, and operating an unlicensed investment scheme." Maggie gasped. "This is a mistake. We're the victims. She made this all up. I didn't know anything about offshore accounts." Chloe sobbed. "I just helped Mom and Dad talk to people." My father stood abruptly, But Deputy Morales was faster. "Sir, we advise you remain silent. Anything you say may be used in court." They were cuffed quietly, methodically, without drama, except for the moment Maggie looked back at me, her eyes burning with rage and shame. "You'll regret this," she said. "Families don't do this to each other." I didn't blink, didn't flinch. "I'm not doing this out of anger," I said. "I'm doing this because someone has to stop you." And clearly, love was never enough. They were led out of the conference room like strangers, like shadows of people I used to know. And for the first time in months, the silence in my chest didn't feel hollow. It felt like peace. Federal Courtroom 4 smelled like paper, anxiety, and cold air. I sat in the front row, my palms sweating against the smooth surface of my statement folder. My chest rose and fell like waves crashing against something hollow. And across the room, just 20 feet from me, sat the three people who once gave me life. My father, Richard Hayes, was wearing a gray suit I hadn't seen since my law school graduation. He looked smaller in it now, shrunk, worn down. My mother, Maggie, was sitting beside him, her eyes darting around the room, trying to find something familiar in a place that would offer her none. And then there was Chloe, my sister, my shadow, my mirror. She didn't look up. She hadn't looked at me since they were arrested. Judge Franklin Monroe called the courtroom to order. His voice was commanding, cutting through the tension like a sharp blade. The defense clung to the narrative they'd rehearsed. Unintentional mistakes, family loyalty, financial hardship. They tried to paint the fraud as a desperate act of love. But then Natalie Granger, the federal prosecutor, stood, and with calm, deliberate precision, she shattered their story. These actions were not accidents. She said, they were calculated, rehearsed, and they used a daughter's identity, her professional standing, her spotless reputation, to commit financial assault on innocent victims. There was a silence that followed her words, the kind of silence that sounds like truth settling into every corner of the room. And then they called my name. I stood, my knees felt unsteady, my hands were trembling, but my voice, when I finally spoke, was steel wrapped in sorrow. "My name is Lauren Hayes," I began, facing the judge, the jury, and my family. "I'm a corporate attorney at Rothman and Lindley, and I'm here today not just as a victim of identity theft, but as someone who was weaponized." Every word I said pierced through me before it landed on them. I spoke about the forged emails, the fraudulent investment fund, the elderly victims, the lives dismantled in the name of family. And then, I locked eyes with Chloe. "I wasn't just betrayed," I said, voice cracking. "I was repurposed. They turned me into a mask. They wore my name like a costume while they robbed people of their savings, their homes, their peace of mind." Photos were shown, social media posts. My mother in designer dresses on a yacht. My father at a golf course in Florida. All dated within days of large withdrawals from the victims' accounts. The prosecution played video statements from multiple victims. Eleanor Whitmore sat quietly in the front row. The day she discovered she'd lost her entire retirement savings because she trusted a name that wasn't even mine. It was one of the few times I saw her cry. And then came Chloe's defense. Her lawyer tried to argue she was acting under her parents' influence, that she was young, naive, blinded by love for her family. But the prosecution showed something else. A job application submitted by Chloe Hayes, using my resume, my bar license number, my law degree, and even my digital signature. No one in the courtroom believed innocence after that. The trial lasted 3 days. The deliberation, just under 4 hours. When Judge Monroe returned, the courtroom fell still. Time slowed. My breath caught in my throat as I reached for Ethan's hand beneath the table. And then, based on the overwhelming evidence presented, the testimonies of the victims, and the clear pattern of calculated fraud, Judge Monroe said, "This court rules as follows. My father, 18 years in federal prison, no possibility of parole for the first 10. My mother, 15 years. Chloe, 12 years, plus a permanent ban from holding any financial authority or professional licensing in any fiduciary role. Their assets, seized. Every home, every car, every dollar they had tied to the crimes, liquidated and redirected to the victims' restitution fund." I felt my heart rupture, and then rebuild itself in the very same breath. As they were led from the courtroom, I didn't cry. I watched. I watched Maggie crumble into her chair like her body finally gave up on denial. I watched Chloe fall apart, sobbing uncontrollably. I didn't know it would go this far. She whimpered, but she did. They all did, and they did it anyway. As Richard passed me in cuffs, he didn't even look at me. But Maggie did, and in her eyes, I saw not regret, but disbelief, that I had stood up, that I had spoken, that I had chosen justice over loyalty. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, the verdict still echoing through my bones. I wasn't happy. How could I be? I had just buried the illusion of my family in front of a federal judge. But I wasn't broken either. I was free. If you've made it this far, thank you, not just for listening, but for witnessing. Because this isn't just about courtrooms or prison sentences. It's about survival. It's about knowing that love without respect is not love, it's leverage. And that you are allowed to walk away from people who burn you and expect you to smile through the smoke. Have you ever had to choose between truth and family? Tell me in the comments. Let this be a space for the brave. And if this story has cracked something open in you, please subscribe. We're not done, because healing isn't the end. It's where the real story begins. I used to think strength meant staying silent. That if I kept my head down, worked hard enough, loved deeply enough, maybe the people who hurt me would stop. Maybe they'd realize I was worth protecting. They never did, but I did. 3 days after the sentencing, I sat across from Vivian Clark in the glass conference room at Rothman and Lindley. The room overlooked the skyline, skyscrapers bathed in winter light, reaching upward like they too had survived a storm. Vivian didn't say much, she just slid a folder toward me. Her eyes, usually analytical, were warm that morning. It's called Reclaim and Rise, she said. It's a support initiative for people who've been financially abused by family. I stared at the folder. Pale blue, minimalist. Inside was an offer letter. They wanted me to lead it. Not just because I was a lawyer, but because I had lived it. I didn't answer right away. That night, I went home and sat in the quiet. And I cried, not the kind of sobbing that wrecks your lungs, but the kind that sits in your throat like a lump of glass. I wasn't crying because they went to prison. I was crying because for the first time, they couldn't touch me anymore. I said yes. Week 1 of Reclaim and Rise was like stepping into a mirror maze of grief and survival. Calls came pouring in, messages from strangers who weren't strangers at all. They knew my ache, my shame, my silence. A woman named Marlene, 67 years old, called sobbing from her car. I gave my son my entire retirement. She whispered, he said it was just a loan. Now he's disappeared, and I feel so stupid. I gripped the phone so tight my knuckles ached. No one is stupid for trusting someone they love, I told her, but rising after betrayal, that takes courage most people can't imagine. In that first week, we had over 300 survivors reach out. Mostly women, mostly middle-aged or older. Mostly people who had been taught that love meant self-erasure. They were accountants, teachers, caregivers, even lawyers. And as I listened to them, I realized something. I had been punishing myself. Not just for being fooled, but for ever believing they wouldn't. One story stayed with me. A woman named Talia, around my age. Her older brother had used her credit to take out a business loan. Then left the country. She whispered something I will never forget. Sometimes, the bravest thing we can do isn't to stay. It's to finally cut off what's killing us. I wrote it down, taped it to the mirror in my office. That sentence became the heart of Reclaim and Rise. 2 weeks later, I did something I'd been avoiding. I walked into my childhood home. The court had given me permission to retrieve any personal items unrelated to the case. What was left of our family had been seized, liquidated, cataloged, but inside those walls was the last ghost I needed to face. The hallway still smelled like cinnamon and old secrets. The family photos lined the walls, frozen in time, faces that once meant safety, now just shadows. I opened Chloe's old dresser drawer and found a brittle leather notebook. On the first page, in her handwriting, were the words, "River Pine Plan, don't let Lauren find out." I sat on the edge of my old bed, tears welling, but this time, they weren't because of them. They were for me, for the girl who had once tried so hard to be perfect. Thinking it would keep her safe, I closed the notebook and let her go. That night, we held our first in-person support group. There were only 12 people, but the pain in that room felt infinite. I had prepared a whole speech, but when I looked at them, the trembling hands, the tired smiles, I folded the paper in half and spoke from somewhere deeper. "I'm not here to tell you how to heal," I said softly. "I'm here because I once believed that family meant safety, until they crossed every line I thought couldn't be crossed." A young woman, maybe 23, stood up, eyes shimmering, Thank you for saying what I never dared to admit, she said, that love should never be an excuse for harm. After the meeting, I walked home in the cold. The stars were faint, but I looked up anyway. I no longer had a mother, a father, a sister, not really, but I had found a new kind of family. One built not on guilt or blood or silence, but on honesty, on dignity, on truth. If you're still listening, thank you. Because maybe you know this pain. Maybe you've had your name used, your trust shattered, your silence weaponized, and maybe you're still wondering if you're allowed to walk away. Let me say this with everything I have. You are allowed to leave. You are allowed to speak. You are allowed to survive. Tell me in the comments, what's the bravest thing you've ever done for yourself? And if you want to be part of something that reclaims truth and rises from the ashes, subscribe, because this story isn't over. It's just beginning, and I promise, you won't walk through it alone. There was a time I would have done anything to keep the word family intact. I would have swallowed lies, erased red flags, justified betrayals, just to preserve the illusion that we were whole. That the people who raised me, the ones I called mom and dad, the sister I once read bedtime stories to, would never do the things they did. But they did, and I survived it. Months after the trial, life moved on. The headlines faded, my inbox quieted, the courtroom became a memory. But something inside me remained loud, a voice that kept asking, what does family really mean? Because blood didn't protect me, loyalty didn't save me, silence nearly destroyed me, and yet, in the aftermath of destruction, I found something I never expected, a different kind of family. Not one built on DNA or last names, but one built on presence, on protection, on people who didn't ask me to shrink myself in exchange for love. There was Ethan, who never once questioned my rage. Vivian, who fought beside me like every name on that list was hers too. Eleanor, who lost everything and still stood up to say, you saved us. And hundreds of strangers, now friends, who sent letters, voice notes, and handwritten notes saying, thank you for standing up. Because of you, I found the courage to leave too. One autumn afternoon, I was sitting on a park bench with a cup of coffee in hand. The leaves were falling, burnt orange and amber, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't bracing for the next blow. I was breathing. Solstice light filtered through bare branches. Vivian joined me, carrying 2 hot teas and that knowing look in her eyes. Do you think you'll ever forgive them? She asked quietly. I stared at the trees, my voice calm. I don't know if forgiveness is the point anymore. She didn't push, she just waited. I continued, slowly. Forgiveness, at its core, is about peace, and I've made peace with something more important. I forgive myself. For staying too long, for being too kind, for thinking that if I just worked harder, they'd finally love me the right way. Vivian nodded, and now, I smiled. Now I use my voice, not to convince them, but to protect the ones who never had a chance. That evening, I stood alone in the community hall where Reclaim and Rise had just hosted its biggest event yet. The lights were still warm, the chairs half stacked, and on a small table in the corner were dozens of handwritten notes from people who had shown up just to say, I thought I was the only one. You helped me believe my story matters too. I used to think I was weak for walking away, but now I know, it was the bravest thing I've ever done. I held one of the notes in my hands, tracing the shaky handwriting like it was my own. And I thought to myself, this is family. This is what it's always meant to be. People who see you, people who hear the truth and don't look away. People who stay, not because they have to, but because they choose to. I used to be the daughter who tried to keep everything together. Who thought if I could just be perfect, no one would hurt me. But the truth is, love that demands your silence isn't love. It's control, and I've stopped calling control compassion. Now, when people ask me what family means, I tell them this: family is not blood, it's not obligation, it's not the ones who know your history but deny your pain. Family is the ones who protect your peace, even when it's inconvenient, who honor your boundaries, not break them, who choose you, again and again, without needing to wound you first. So, to you, if you've been hurt by the ones who were supposed to love you the most, you're not broken, you're not naive, and you are not alone. You're a survivor of something you didn't cause. And you have the right to build your own definition of family. One built on truth, one built on care, one that doesn't ask you to bleed quietly. If this story resonates with you, if you've ever had to walk away from someone you once called home, tell me in the comments. I want to hear you. We all do. And if you haven't subscribed yet, But you've made it this far. Maybe this story was meant for you. Hit that button. Join this growing family of truth tellers. We rise together. I lost a family, but I found myself. And from that, I've started to rewrite what love really means. This is only the beginning.